Hi everybody, welcome back to the Crime Lab. Today we are going to be talking about the Japanese serial killer Futoshi Matsunaga, my bad. Um, he is known for defrauding and torturing his victims. And actually this whole incident that was caused by him is known as the Kita Kyushu serial murder incident. I hope I pronounced that correctly. As I have said in many of my international videos, I unfortunately don't speak any other languages. So there's the occasional name or town or province name that I may stumble through. If you happen to speak that language or know a better way of pronouncing it and can put it phonetically in the comments, feel free to do that. Because I'm not the best at other languages and other names unless somebody like either says it to my face or spells it phonetically. So he is officially convicted of 6 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter between 1996 and 1998. His accomplice was Junko Ogata, who received 1 life sentence. And his crimes were so atrocious that the media actually was not willing to report a lot of the details. So a lot of these details are from multiple sources where I could actually confirm, different things about the different kind of parts of this incident. So in his early life, Matsunaga was born in, I'm going to attempt to pronounce this, Kokurakita ward of Kita Kyushu in Fukuoka Prefecture and grew up in Yanagawa. That was a lot of words that I did not know how to pronounce. And where I could find it, that's kind of how they came across. So I apologize to any native speakers if I completely butchered that. He received good grades while he was in school and had a relatively charming personality, but he did end up causing some trouble. He had some disciplinary problems. He married at 19 years old and had a son. But during this marriage, he was actually involved with at least 10 different mistresses and then became involved with Junko Ogata, who was his accomplice, and they were a former schoolmate. So jumping ahead a little bit, in 1984, he promised to marry Junko, but her mother, Shizumi, did not approve because of the abuse to her daughter that he was showing her. So then Matsunaga raped Shizumi as a result. In 1985, convinced Junko her family hated her due to a former suicide attempt and persuaded her to move in with him. So doing a lot of blackmail and a lot of mental manipulation. And about that same time, he purchased a building to operate a futon business. And on the 3rd floor of the building, he actually began to electrically shock employees. And then he would kind of torture them because he would actually shout at them about spirits sucking away their fortune through like microphones and stuff just to kind of torment them. And then by 1992, Matsunaga had stolen 180 million yen, which in US dollar equivalent would have been about $1.2 million through fraud and blackmail up to this point. So then kind of moving on to the murders, kind of beyond the blackmail and the fraud. He lived in a condo in, again, I'm going to butcher this kind of prefecture name, Kokurakituku. And his first victim was a married woman with 3 children. So in April 1993, convinced her to leave her husband and run away with him, and said that Junko was his sister. So Junko was living with him at the time. So one of the children died under mysterious circumstances. It was never really reported how this child died. The other two children were actually sent to live with their father. So they were completely out of the picture, leaving their mom alone. And then at this point, defrauded this woman for 11.8 million yen. So then in late 1993, he began victimizing Kumio Turaya and his daughter, and their daughter. And Turaya had confided in Matsunaga about his criminal history, so then Matsunaga was able to use that as blackmail. And they were held captive in the apartment while being tortured with electric shock, being forced to eat their own feces, and the daughter was forced to bite her father. And then Kumio died as a result of the abuse in February 1996, so about 3 years later. The daughter was convinced that she had murdered her father and was actually forced to dispose of the remains that were thrown away in the Kanisaki Peninsula area, the sea in that area. So the next victim was an acquaintance of the previous victims, Kumio. Promised to marry her after convincing her of being a high college graduate. So, you have like really big colleges all across the world. Matsunaga had convinced this person that he had graduated from one of those elite schools, and defrauded her of 5.6 million yen. And then, because of all of this and all of the suspected abuse that happened, the woman jumped from a second-story window and was put into a mental hospital. Her daughter was released. Never had an issue with her daughter, but she was kept in a hospital after that. So then Junko, who had been around for all these different things, decided, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna try and escape this person. I'm gonna try and escape from Matsunaga's kind of grip. Said she was leaving for work and didn't return. So then Matsunaga threatened to blackmail the entire family if she didn't. And he actually ended up faking a suicide. Junko returned, and then the abuse continued, unfortunately. And even after her return, Matsunaga raped Junko's sister Raiko, and the family gave him 63 million yen. They delivered it to him, but then he held them captive and controlled them in similar ways to another notorious torturer killer, Shako Asahara, who I'm going to do a video later on about. So then in December of 1997, he coerced Junko to shock her 63-year-old father to death, which is kind of horrifying that she agreed to do it, but considering how well blackmail can work, some people wouldn't be surprised. So then at this point, Junko's mother's mental state led to Matsunaga forcing Junko's sister and her husband to strangle their mother. So then several weeks later, Junko's sister and her Junko's niece were killed. And then her brother-in-law was starved to death. And then Junko and her other niece were killed. Killed Junko's 5-year-old nephew. And then the bodies were dismembered, boiled in pots, and dumped into the sea or left in bathrooms. So there was a lot of murders and abuse and blackmail and all of this sort of stuff going on kind of simultaneously. So then finally in July of 2000, Matsunaga convinced another woman to go away with him, with the prospects of marriage. And the woman gave him and Junko her twins and 20 million yen to raise them. So then, so in 2002, so January 2002, if you remember Kumio, who was one of Matsunaga's early victims from 1993, I had to refer to my notes of timelines and stuff. So this is almost 10 years later. She was found, or she escaped, but then about 2 weeks later, she was found and brought back and tortured some more. She then was able to do a second escape attempt and actually was able to find police and report the crimes and the torture. So then, she was arrested, or he was arrested. Matsunaga was arrested after Kumio's daughter's second escape attempt. He was arrested on March 7th. So then media originally reported similarities to Fusco-sano until more details emerged of the murders. That's why it's so similar to the Shoko Asara crimes. So then Matsunaga was charged with 7 murders. I know I didn't go super in depth with all of them. I did not. There's some information that's kind of conflicting between reports. So some of it some information was consistent, other stuff was not. So I wanted to omit the inconsistencies, if I could. So then Matsunaga was charged with 7 murders. Junko confessed to her parts in these murders and torture, but Matsunaga insisted that she had fabricated any confessions, saying that women couldn't take part in any of this. So a lot of the remains were never recovered because they were dumped at sea. So there was no physical evidence actually associating it. It was just testimony alone. So the initial sentence was Matsunaga and Junko were sentenced to die by hanging. But then an appeal in 2007 came through. Matsunaga's sentence was upheld. He's on death row. And Junko, her stuff was changed to life imprisonment because she was an accomplice. She was not the actual murderer based on all the evidence and testimony. You know, if this had been something where there was some cannibalism too, this would have kind of reminded me of the Issei Sagawa case. Although Issei was Japanese, doing it in France. But considering that they were from the same country, although Matsunaga was doing it in Japan, whereas Sagawa was doing it in France, I wouldn't be shocked if they ran into each other at some point, or, you know, they'd at least heard about each other. But if anybody has any comments, questions, ideas for future videos, feel free to leave them down in the comments. Have a great rest of your day.